Countdown by Ben Mikaelsen. Chapter 4. On the TV, the words were repeated. The winner of NASA's Junior Astronaut Lottery is Elliot Andrew Schroeder. Elliot's mind struggled with the name. It must be someone else. It must be. Some other Elliot Andrew Schroeder had won the Junior Astronaut Lottery. The classroom door opened, and in walked the principal, followed by a man and a woman in blue suit coats with NASA lapel patches. By now, all the students were standing and cheering. Elliot couldn't speak. His face felt hot. He had trouble swallowing. "Are you Elliot Schroeder?" asked the NASA man, pushing past the frenzied students. "I guess," stammered Elliot. The man shook Elliot's hand vigorously. "Congratulations, son. I'm Frank Boslow." He gestured. "This is Miss Jackie Lopez." Elliot felt like a fish gulping on air. I can't believe it." "Believe it, son," said Mr. Boslow. "Your parents are on the way here right now." "This is crazy," Elliot said, dumbfounded. "Sit down, everybody," shouted Mr. Boyd as students pummeled Elliot. Others jumped up and down, whistling, clapping, and hooting. Elliot's mind clogged with questions. "Come," shouted the principal, guiding Elliot past the clustered students and down the hallway. Cheering erupted from other classrooms as they passed. When the door closed behind them in the principal's office, the noise finally grew muffled. For the first time, Elliot took a better look at the two NASA people. Miss Lopez had dark hair and looked trim in her NASA jacket. Elliot liked her warm smile and big dark eyes. Mr. Boslow was older and more rumpled. His jacket looked too small for him. He had bushy eyebrows that looked like worn-out toothbrushes, and he talked loudly. "What does it feel like to be selected as NASA's first junior astronaut?" he said. "Dad told me there was more chance of a mosquito getting hit by lightning," Elliot said. Miss Lopez laughed and held up a thick folder. "When your parents arrive, we'll go over all these forms. You must have a million questions." Elliot nodded. "How soon will I go into space?" "In 9 months. NASA wants you on the STS-97 mission aboard the Space Shuttle Endeavour. Training will be based at the Johnson Space Center in Houston, Texas." "I still can't believe it," Elliot stammered, shaking his head to wake himself from the crazy dream. $1 million will be spent on your training," Miss Lopez explained. Mr. Boslow clapped Elliot on the back. "The $1 million man." "The same will be spent on your alternate, Mandy Harris," Miss Lopez added. "A girl?" Elliot said, remembering the alternate announcement. Miss Lopez nodded. "Yes, a girl." Elliot scratched at his leg. "Do I get to skip school?" The principal leaned back in his chair. "Your training will be the greatest school on Earth. Or in space. Imagine all you'll learn." A knock on the door made Elliot turn. In walked his parents. Dalton and Angie still wore their work jeans and flannel shirts. Uncertainty clouded their faces. "Is it really true our son has been picked to go into space?" Dalton asked. "Sure is, Mr. Schroeder," answered the NASA man. Frank Boslow introducing himself and Miss Lopez. Angie hugged Elliot, worry creasing her forehead. "We'll have to talk about this. I don't know if you should go into space." "Mom!" Elliot exclaimed. "I've already been picked." "Elliot's right," said Dalton. "This was all settled back when we agreed to let him enter the lottery." "But it could be dangerous," said Angie. "I'm not afraid," Elliot said, squaring his shoulders. Miss Lopez tapped a pencil deliberately on the table and studied Elliot. "You should be," she said. Elliot coughed nervously. "How soon do I start training?" "In 3 days. We'll fly you to Houston," Miss Lopez said. "You'll have a week of briefings and orientation. Then it's down to business." "He can't go to Houston alone," Angie said. Miss Lopez seemed surprised. "Of course not. We encourage you to move to Houston during Elliot's training." Dalton looked directly at Elliot. Frustration edged his voice. Tending a ranch doesn't allow us to run off to Texas for 9 months. We'd have no ranch left when we came home. Elliot will be well cared for and supervised, said Mr. Boslow. Once he starts training, he will be busier than a pigeon in a hurricane. Time will be extremely limited. NASA is risking a lot with this program. We're risking our son, said Angie. Miss Lopez smiled understandingly. I know it won't be easy for you two. Mom and Dad? I'll be all right, Elliot said. Are you sure of that? Angie asked, hugging Elliot. Dalton grumped. He'll be fine. It's us that will be train wrecks. He turned to Elliot. Just make sure you come back from space so I have someone to take over the ranch. Elliot avoided his dad's eyes. For 2 hours, Elliot and his parents sat in the principal's office asking questions. Finally, Mr. Boslow looked at his watch. We've arranged a news conference in the gym at 11:30. It's almost time. As they walked toward the gym, Elliot looked out and saw the parking lot jammed with cars. In the gym, students and townspeople filled the bleachers. Half of Big Timber was there. Elliot's mom and dad were given front row seats among the press. Miss Lopez and Mr. Boslow joined Elliot at a table set up in the middle of the gym floor. For an hour, reporters questioned Elliot. At first, they asked things like, "How does it feel?" and "Are you excited?" But then one lady with lots of makeup stood and asked, "Why should money be wasted sending you into space when people are starving in the ghettos?" Elliot shrugged. "Maybe the information we get will help people," he said. "Besides, with me in space, you'll have one less down here." He didn't mean to be funny, but everybody laughed. The lady sat down in a huff. A big man with puffy red cheeks stood and said, "By sending you into space, isn't NASA really trying to get funding from Congress for other projects like the space station or a Mars mission?" Elliot shrugged. I don't know what NASA thinks," he said. "I haven't talked to them, but I do know this." Elliot pointed to all the students. "If your Congress won't approve the money for a Mars mission, someday ours will." The students in the auditorium clapped and whistled. Mr. Boslow stood, ending the news conference. He turned and shook Elliot's hand. "You'll do just fine as NASA's first junior astronaut." Miss Lopez nodded her quiet agreement. Elliot wasn't so sure. Maasai herder Vincent Oldhome walked slowly from his father's small hut and around the cattle corral to the hut he shared with his younger brothers. Carefully, he rested his spear outside. Inside, everybody slept. Vincent kicked the cowskin, sandals from his feet, and lowered himself onto the stiff cowhide to sleep. The cold night air carried the restless sounds of the cattle. Vincent listened. When the stomping and hungry bawls did not stop, he rose and crept out into the open air. Maybe it was only the cattle's hunger, but maybe they smelled a lion. He picked up his spear. Moving as silently as a cheetah, he walked to the edge of the corral and crouched in the dark, listening and waiting. He gazed up. Why did the rains not come to the great Maasai land? Had something chased them from the sky? Each day the angry clouds gathered and churned, but they left again without letting the forgiving rains fall from their great white bellies. The elders prayed to Enge, the one and only God, but this did not stop Enge's anger. Yesterday the elders had picked a sheep of only one color and killed it. They burned the body in the shadow of Mount Lenge, a holy place. The smoke from the fire had risen, proof that Enge received the offering. But still the rains did not come. Why was Enge mad? Vincent stared at the black sky filled with stars. He knew the sky well because he looked up often. But one does not understand all that one sees. For Vincent, the more he looked up, the more it brought questions to his head. Some elders believed that stars were the eyes of the god, Enge. Vincent searched for the 3 stars that stood in a row. These were the 3 elders. The stars about them were the widows wanting to marry the elders. Farther down in the sky waited Vincent's favorite star, Lekan, the bright star of the evening. The elders searched the sky each night for Lekan as a sign of rain. Also, they searched for Inkokua, the group of stars that always brought the heavy rains. This year, the Inkokua had forgotten to bring rain. Now the elders searched for any good sign, even shadowed rings around the moon. A cow bawled, and Vincent searched the dark corral. Something bothered the cattle. If a lion attacked the cattle at this moment, he would take his spear and kill the lion. One life would end to save another. Vincent understood the balance, but tomorrow Papa had demanded that he hunt lion or elephant with the boys from the village, from the other Engangs, killing only to prove courage. Vincent did not wish to kill in this way, but he could not stop tomorrow's sun from rising. Later, when the cattle had quieted and the stars were tired of being watched, Vincent rose and returned to the small hut. His head hurt from not finding answers. Still, the night would not let him sleep. His thoughts still moved around among the stars, among the eyes of Engay. Early, with the sun still hiding, 5 boys came from other Engangs. Obediently, Vincent left with them. He carried his spear, his walking stick, and his nobkuri, a short branch with a polished knot on one end. This worked well for prodding cattle if held by the knob, or for fighting if held by the shaft. "How many lions have you killed, Vincent?" asked Lebu, the tallest and loudest of the boys. "None," Vincent admitted quietly. Lebu poked Vincent with his nobkuri. "Ah, then the lions know you are a coward." The other boys laughed. Vincent remained silent. "Going to the wood school has made you a coward," Lebu taunted. "What kind of name is Vincent?" When Vincent still did not answer, Lebu spit at the ground. "A jackal does not become a warrior." "Why do we take a coward to help kill the lion Alarani?" Alarani was the name given to the one old male lion who had grown very large and escaped many hunts. His name meant killer. Lebu pointed at Vincent. "If you make more noise than my shadow, I will throw my spear at you." He turned to the rest. "I have seen Alarani by the river where the valley narrows. He grows old and sleeps much. I think today he will die." In a single line the boys walked. They would not reach Alarani until the sun rose high. Vincent pulled his red striped toga tightly around his shoulders. The red sheet could be seen from very far in Masailand. This is how it should be. All living things should fear the Masai. As the boys neared where Lebu had last seen the great lion, Alarani, they spoke more and more boldly. "Today we will make a kill," said the boy Mosipa. "I will throw the first spear," bragged Lebu. Vincent remained quiet. He feared Alarani. All boys feared the great lion, but Vincent's fear did not make him hate the big cat. If it attacked his herd, then yes, he would try to kill it. But why kill Alarani for no reason? As they neared the river, all talking stopped. Only the trees and the winds made sounds. If Alarani was here, each boy would try to be the first to spear him. This brought great danger because lions remembered well. Though attacked by many spears, lions tried always to kill whoever brought the first pain. After throwing spears, the next honor came to the one who first grabbed and held on to the great Alarani's tail. "There," whispered Corio, a short boy with big muscles and a slanted smile. He pointed to a pride of lions resting in the shade of an umbrella tree. "Where is our Alarani?" hissed Lebu. "He must be near. I think those are his lions." The boy Sapporo pointed. "There, by the water. He hides near the black tree far from the others." Sapporo was right. It was the great Alarani. Staying far from the main pride, Vincent joined the boys as they surrounded the big lion. The great Alarani lay in the shaded grass and raised his shaggy yellow head to watch them. As they closed in, he rose stiffly to his feet and gazed about with his head held low. His whiskers twitched. One step at a time, the circle tightened. Each boy with a spear held over his shoulder. Alarani's great chest filled with air, and he bared his teeth, sounding a deep and chilling growl of death.